When I was sitting in a restaurant, my unfaithful wife saw me and rushed to hug me, and her lover couldn't stop himself from calling me names and saying he wanted to be with her. I threw her away, pulled out the Glock I had left after the service. He got scared and started running, and I shot. Be me, 29 years old. Never thought I'd be that guy. The one who finds his whole life reduced to shattered pieces on a dirty bedroom floor. Yet here I am, gripping a gun I never thought I'd use, staring into the pleading, panicked eyes of some coward who'd been sharing my bed, or at least my wife's part of it. But let's rewind. I'm getting ahead of myself. Her name is Elizabeth. If you had asked me just 3 days ago, I'd have said she was the woman I'd die for. Elizabeth with her auburn hair, always styled to perfection. Her sharp wit and that face, a face that knew how to smile at you while stabbing you in the back. Without breaking eye contact, the woman was all charm and venom wrapped up in one sleek package. And I had been blind enough to love her. Today, though, I saw the truth for what it was, a truth that unraveled so quickly it left me breathless and shaking. Was home early from work. Random stroke of luck or cruel twist of fate, depending on how you look at it. Had been feeling off that day, uneasy in my skin, so decided to skip out on the last hour of reviewing client portfolios. I'm a corporate lawyer in San Diego. Walked in through the front door, expecting to see Elizabeth watching one of her pretentious French films or scrolling through her phone. Instead, I heard it. Low voices, a quiet laugh that was far too intimate, the sound of a man. My blood froze mid-step. For a split second thought maybe I was imagining things. Must have misheard, right? But then Elizabeth's voice cut through the silence like a dagger. Teasing, flirtatious. Not for me. Didn't think, just moved up the stairs 2 at a time. Heart pounding so hard, thought it might explode. The bedroom door was ajar. Didn't bother knocking. Pushed it open, and there they were. Elizabeth half naked, her hair a mess. Far cry from the perfectly put-together woman she pretended to be for me every day. And next to her was this idiot, a man who looked like he'd crawled straight out of a hipster coffee shop. Unkempt beard, jeans barely hanging off his hips, a t-shirt wrinkled and damp with sweat. Didn't know his name. Didn't care? They froze. All 3 of us locked in a moment I'll never forget. Elizabeth sat up, eyes wide and mouth open. What I can only describe as shock and annoyance. Not guilt. No, that would have been too decent for her. Lucas, she said finally, her voice dripping with irritation, as if I was the one who'd done something wrong. What are you doing home? Couldn't even speak. My gaze darted between her and her friend. He looked scared out of his mind. A deer caught in headlights. Good. You're joking, right? I finally managed to say, my voice cracking from the sheer rage boiling inside me. What am I doing home? You think this is the time to be asking questions? Elizabeth rolled her eyes, as if I'd caught her doing something as harmless as forgetting to take out the trash. Relax, Lucas. Don't be so dramatic. And then the guy, this absolute moron, spoke up. Man, look, I didn't know she was married, okay? That's when I saw red. Literally. Was like something inside me snapped. I'll deal with you in a minute, I said coldly, pointing a shaking finger at him. You sit your ass down? Then turned to Elizabeth. You explain, now. Elizabeth sighed and stood up, barely bothering to cover herself with the sheet. What do you want me to say, Lucas? She asked casually, as if we were talking about nothing more serious than what to have for dinner. I'm tired of living a lie. I have a right to love whoever I want. That's when the idiot stood up. Big mistake. Tried to edge toward the door. Didn't let him get far. Reached into the bedside drawer. Pulled out the revolver I kept for emergencies. Aimed it at his leg. Sit down, I growled. Elizabeth screamed. Lucas, have you lost your mind? The guy froze mid-step. His face drained of all color. Hey man, no need to do anything crazy. Fired. The gunshot exploded through the room. Elizabeth shrieked, her hands flying to her ears. The guy collapsed to the floor with a howl of pain, clutching his thigh. Blood seeped between his fingers. Took a step forward. The revolver still trained on him. You're not getting far, I said calmly, my voice colder than ice. You're going to sit there. And you're going to tell me why the hell you thought it was okay to screw my wife. Elizabeth lunged at me then, grabbing my arm, her voice shrill and furious. Lucas, stop, you can't do this. Shoved her off easily, the gun still steady. She fell back onto the bed, glaring at me with so much hatred, made my stomach turn. I will fight for my right to love someone else, she screamed, her words hitting me like a slap. You're just an idiot who doesn't understand anything. An idiot. That's what she thought of me. Stared at her for a long moment. The realization sunk in like a stone in my chest. Elizabeth, I said quietly, my voice shaking with fury. I don't think you understand just how far this has gone. For a moment, the room stood still. My ears rang from the gunshot, but the silence that followed felt deafening. Elizabeth sat on the edge of the bed, chest heaving, her face twisted into a mask of disgust and rage. Her lover whimpered on the floor, clutching his bleeding leg like the pathetic fool he was. I stood there, the revolver still in my hand, breathing hard. Wasn't just my heart pounding. Could feel the cracks spreading inside me. Cracks that had been hidden for God knows how long, now breaking wide open for me to see. Elizabeth was the first to move. She grabbed a silk robe from the floor, slipped it on, tying it loosely around her waist. "You're insane, Lucas. Absolutely insane." Laughed bitterly. "I'm insane?" Gestured to the scene around me. "You're sitting here half naked with another man, and I'm the one who's lost it? You've got some nerve." Elizabeth's eyes burned into mine, full of contempt, not guilt, not shame, just pure seething hatred. She folded her arms across her chest, like she had any moral high ground to stand on. "You're overreacting. This isn't the first time something hasn't gone your way and you've flown off the handle." Her words punched me in the gut. Was she serious? How long had she been waiting to weaponize that against me? Pointed toward the bleeding idiot on the floor. "Who the hell is this guy, Elizabeth? Your yoga buddy? Someone you met while I was working my ass off to put a roof over our heads?" Elizabeth shrugged like I'd asked her what time it was. "His name's Andrew. He's not the problem here. You are Andrew." Of course it was something pretentious like Andrew. Turned my attention to him, watching him wince as he shifted on the carpet. "Andrew, how long has this been going on?" He looked up at me with glassy eyes, stammering through his pain. I don't know, man, a couple months." Clenched my jaw so hard I thought my teeth might shatter. "A couple months?" The words came out like venom. Elizabeth stepped between us, blocking my line of sight like I wasn't holding a goddamn gun. "Leave him alone, Lucas. You're embarrassing yourself. He didn't do anything wrong." Let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Didn't do anything wrong? He was screwing my wife. You don't own me." Elizabeth spat, eyes blazing. "I have the right to be with someone who makes me happy. Someone who actually listens to me, instead of burying himself in work like you do." That hit a nerve. My grip on the revolver tightened. "Oh, I'm sorry I was too busy paying for your shopping sprees, Elizabeth. Too busy keeping this house running, so you could sit around and complain about being unfulfilled?" Her lip curled into a sneer. "You think throwing money around makes you a good husband? Newsflash, Lucas. You're boring. You're a joke." Blinked at her, stunned. "A joke?" "Yeah," she said, her voice dripping with malice. "You're an insecure little man who can't handle the fact that someone might not want you anymore." That was it. The last shred of restraint I had left snapped, turned back to Andrew, who was squirming like a worm on the carpet. "You think you're real brave, don't you? Walking into another man's home and putting your hands on his wife." "Lucas, stop!" Elizabeth screamed, lunging for the gun again. Pushed her away harder this time. She stumbled back into the dresser, knocking over a lamp. Andrew let out another pathetic groan. "Look, man, I didn't mean for this to happen. I swear." "You didn't mean for it to happen?" Interrupted, my voice ice cold. "What, you just tripped and fell into bed with my wife?" Andrew didn't answer, just stared at me with that stupid, terrified look on his face. He didn't have to say anything. The truth was written all over the room. Elizabeth, regaining her balance, hissed at me like a snake. "You're pathetic, Lucas. I don't love you anymore, okay?" "I haven't for years. You've just been too blind to see it." Something inside me shattered. Not cracked, shattered. Couldn't speak. Just stared at her, taking in the venom dripping from her words. The scorn etched across her face. This woman I'd built a life with, shared dreams with, was looking at me like I was nothing more than garbage to be thrown away. Andrew groaned again, snapping me out of it. Blood was pooling under his leg, staining the beige carpet. My home. Pointed the revolver at him one last time. "You're going to leave here, Andrew. And when you do, you're going to remember what happens when you mess with another man's wife." Andrew nodded quickly, too scared to argue. Yeah, man, I get it." Elizabeth stepped forward again, blocking my aim. "Enough, Lucas. Just go. Get out of here before you do something you can't take back." Stared at her, feeling the rage burn through my veins like acid. "You don't get to tell me what to do, Elizabeth." "Not anymore." She glared at me, the defiance in her eyes almost daring me to do something. "You want to play the tough guy, Lucas? Go ahead, shoot him again. Shoot me too while you're at it. I dare you." Her words echoed in the room, hanging heavy in the air. For the first time, I saw Elizabeth for what she really was. Cold, manipulative, and utterly heartless. Lowered the gun slowly. "Don't worry," I said quietly, my voice shaking with anger. "I'm done with both of you." And with that, I turned, walked out of the bedroom. My hands were trembling, my mind spinning out of control. The hallway felt like it stretched for miles. My steps were heavy, each one dragging me further away from the wreckage upstairs. Behind me, I could still hear Elizabeth's voice. echoing through the walls, snapping orders at Andrew. The clown, she was always good at giving orders, always good at controlling the narrative. Should have stayed and let her have it. Really let her have it. All the words I'd bottled up, over years of blind trust and naive love, were ready to burst out of me like poison. But my hands were shaking, and my heart was thundering too loud in my ears to focus. Needed to get out. Needed space before I did something I couldn't take back. Paused halfway down the staircase. Gripped the banister to steady myself. My eyes drifted to the family photos that lined the wall. Pictures of me and Elizabeth smiling like fools. Our wedding day. A vacation in Maui. New Year's morning with mugs of espresso. Memories that meant something to me. At least, had she been faking it the whole time? Or was there some point, some fleeting moment when she actually loved me? I haven't loved you for years. Her words replayed in my head. Sharp and final. Like nails in a coffin. Felt like a ghost in my own home. A stranger surrounded by the artifacts of life that didn't exist anymore. At the bottom of the stairs, I stopped again. What the hell was I supposed to do now? Call the cops? Tell them I shot a guy in the leg because he was screwing my wife? Maybe they'd pat me on the back and say, "Good shot, sir. Well done." No. The thought made me laugh bitterly under my breath. I wasn't getting any medals for this one. Turned and looked back up the stairs. The bedroom door was closed now, muffling the sound of Elizabeth's voice. Imagined her crouched beside Andrew, tending to him like some wounded hero. You're pathetic, Lucas. I don't love you anymore. The rage returned in a flash. Hot, consuming, impossible to contain. Clenched my fists so hard my knuckles cracked. She thought I was pathetic. I was the one who put up with her tantrums. I was the one who worked late to keep her life exactly the way she wanted it. I was the one who defended her when people called her shallow or cold. But she wasn't shallow. She wasn't cold. She was a goddamn black hole. And I had been stupid enough to orbit her for far too long. Needed answers. Turned and headed for the kitchen. It was late afternoon. Sunlight streamed through the window over the sink, casting everything in a sickly golden glow. Opened a cabinet, grabbed a glass, filling it with water from the tap. My hand shook as I brought it to my lips, spilling half of it down my shirt. Slammed the glass down on the counter. Elizabeth's voice was suddenly behind me. Are you proud of yourself? Froze. My back to her, gripping the edge of the counter, could hear her bare feet padding across the tile floor, coming closer. Are you? She repeated. Louder this time, turned slowly to face her. She was wearing that damn cashmere robe, the one I bought her for our anniversary last year. It hung loosely off her shoulders, as if she'd thrown it on as an afterthought. She looked at me like I was a piece of gum stuck to her shoe. Proud of myself, echoed. Proud of what, Elizabeth? Catching you in the middle of your little extracurricular activity? Her lip curled. You shot a man, Lucas. You could have killed him. Do you have any idea how insane you look right now? Laughed a hollow, humorless sound. I look insane? You're the one who turned our marriage into a joke. You're the one sneaking around like a damn teenager. Elizabeth rolled her eyes, like I was boring her. This isn't about me, Lucas. This is about you. You haven't been a husband in a long time. You've been a paycheck. That's it, a paycheck. The words hit me harder than any slap could have. My chest burned, my head spinning as her voice pierced through every weak spot I had left. That's how you see me? I said quietly, almost to myself. A paycheck? She shrugged. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? I'm not. I won't apologize for finding happiness somewhere else. You're the one who drove me to this. My vision blurred with fury. You think this is my fault? Of course it is, she snapped. You're boring, Lucas. You don't listen. You don't care. You've been coasting through this marriage for years, acting like it's enough just to exist in the same house as me. Newsflash, it's not. Took a step toward her, the distance between us shrinking to a sliver. So what was the plan, Elizabeth? Keep him around until I found out? Let him parade through my house? Sleep in my bed? She didn't back down. Elizabeth never backed down. Maybe I wouldn't have had to. If you were actually a man, and not just some sad little boy pretending to play house, that was it. Slammed my fist into the cabinet beside her. The sound of splintering wood echoed through the kitchen. She jumped, but only for a second. Her face was calm again, as if she knew she had already won, whatever twisted game she thought we were playing. You're pathetic, she said, her voice cold and final. Stared at her, my breathing ragged. For the first time in my life, I didn't see the woman I married. I didn't see the woman I loved. I saw a stranger, a soulless, manipulative stranger, who would burn down everything we built just to keep herself warm. Stepped back, my hands trembling at my sides. You're going to regret this, Elizabeth. She tilted her head, a small smirk tugging at the corner of her mouth. I doubted. Turned and stormed out of the kitchen, grabbing my keys off the counter. My mind was a hurricane. Thoughts, rage, betrayal, all of it swirling together into something I couldn't untangle. Had no idea where I was going, just knew I couldn't be there anymore. The front door slammed shut behind me. With a force that rattled the windows, stood there on the porch for a moment, the silence outside jarring, compared to the chaos I'd left inside. My chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, my lungs desperate for air, like I'd been underwater, and only now clawed my way to the surface. The sunlight hit me hard. For the first time in what felt like hours, realized how disheveled I must have looked. My shirt was half untucked, stained with the water I spilled earlier. My hands were smudged with dirt and sweat, still shaking with a rage I couldn't contain. Glanced down at the revolver, still clenched in my right hand, the weight of it suddenly suffocating. What had I done? What was I doing? Slipped the revolver into the back waistband of my jeans, hiding it beneath my shirt. Had no plan. My feet just started moving, carrying me down the steps of my porch and into the driveway. My truck sat there like a loyal dog, keys clenched in my palm. Climbed in, slammed the door, started the engine. The rumble beneath me calmed my nerves, just slightly, enough to keep my hands steady as I pulled out of the driveway. The road stretched out ahead of me, long and empty. Had nowhere to go, but I drove anyway, because the thought of turning back, that thought made me sick. Could still see Elizabeth's face, burned into the back of my mind. Smug, unapologetic, like she didn't care about the life she just torched. "You're pathetic." Gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles white. Every word she said, every smug look she gave, replayed in my head like a broken record. The woman who I spent years of my life loving, building a future with, was nothing more than a snake. And the worst part, I hadn't seen it. Not until now. The road blurred past me, houses and fields turning into streaks of color. As the speedometer ticked higher, didn't care. Didn't care about anything. At some point I realized where I was headed. Ryan's place, my oldest friend, the only person I could trust, to tell me if I'd finally gone off the deep end. Ryan lived alone in a small house just outside town, the kind of place you'd miss if you weren't looking for it. Pulled up in his driveway and killed the engine. Ryan answered the door after 3 hard knocks, blinking at me like I'd woken him up. His flannel shirt was half-buttoned, and his graying hair stuck out in odd directions. "Lucas, Jesus man, you look like hell. What's going on?" Pushed past him without answering, walking straight into his living room. Smelled like beer and old takeout. But I didn't care. Dropped onto his beat-up couch, burying my face in my hands. Ryan closed the door behind me, stood there watching me, like I was a ticking time bomb. Then he said cautiously, "What happened?" Looked up, my voice coming out rough and broken. "Elizabeth?" Ryan sighed like he'd been expecting it. "What about her? You two have a fight?" Let out a bitter laugh. "You could say that." "I caught her, Ryan. I caught her with another guy." He froze, his eyebrows shooting up. "What?" "In our bedroom," I said, the words like gravel in my throat. "In our bed." She was... Couldn't finish the sentence. The image was still too raw, too vivid. Felt like I might choke on it. Ryan ran a hand through his hair, letting out a low whistle. "Jesus Christ, man. I don't even know what to say." "Are you sure?" "Am I sure?" Snapped, glaring at him. "I shot the guy in the leg, Ryan. I think I'm pretty damn sure." His jaw dropped. "You shot him?" "Yeah," I muttered, leaning back against the couch, staring at the ceiling. I had my revolver in the drawer. When I saw her, I lost it. I didn't kill him, but I made damn sure he won't forget today. Ryan dropped into the armchair across from me, shaking his head. "Lucas, man, what the hell are you going to do now?" Closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. "I don't know." We sat there for a moment, the silence stretching between us. Ryan grabbed a beer from the cooler next to his chair, handed it to me, cracked it open, and took a long, desperate sip. "You know," Ryan said finally, his voice careful, "I never wanted to say anything before. But Elizabeth always gave me a weird vibe." Looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, scratching at his beard. "I don't know, man. She's always been cold. Like she never really looked at you the way a wife should. You know what I mean? She was always more into herself than she was into you. Hell, she probably loved that reflection in the mirror more than she loved anyone else." Stared into my beer, the bitter taste settling on my tongue. It wasn't like I didn't know that, deep down. But hearing it from someone else made it real. Too real. Ryan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Listen to me, Lucas. I know this feels like the end of the world right now, but you can't let her win. You can't let this destroy you. You're better than that." Didn't answer, just sat there, numb and empty, staring at the label on my beer bottle. Elizabeth's words echoed in my head over and over again. "You're pathetic. I haven't loved you for years. A part of me wanted to go back to the house, drag Andrew out onto the street, and beat the living hell out of him. Another part of me wanted to grab Elizabeth and shake her until she understood what she'd done to me. But what good would it do? She didn't care. She didn't care about any of it. I need to figure this out, Ryan, I said finally, my voice flat. I can't stay with her. Not after this. Ryan nodded, his expression grim. Then don't do anything stupid either, all right? Get a lawyer. Take the house. Take everything. Make her pay for this. His words made sense, but revenge didn't feel like enough. I wanted more. I wanted her to hurt, to feel the same betrayal eating me alive from the inside out. I'll think about it, I muttered. Ryan watched me carefully. Don't just think about it, Lucas. Do something. And for the first time that day, I knew he was right. Stayed at Ryan's for hours, the beer dulling the edges of my rage, but doing nothing to erase the mess my life had become. We didn't say much after that first burst of conversation. He sat in his armchair, occasionally glancing at me, like I was a grenade that could go off at any second. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, my mind looping through images of Elizabeth's smug face and Andrew's pathetic whimper as he clutched his leg. Could still feel the weight of the revolver in my hand. That moment of pure instinct. If I hadn't pulled the trigger, hell, I didn't know what I would have done. Shooting him was bad enough. Want to crash here tonight? Ryan finally asked, breaking the silence. Shook my head. No, I can't just hide here forever. Ryan didn't push me. At least let me drive you home. You're in no shape to be behind the wheel. Home. That word didn't mean what it used to. I'll be fine, I muttered. I wasn't, but at this point I didn't care. I needed to face the wreckage sooner or later. Left Ryan's house just as the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with dark purples and reds. The drive home felt surreal, like I was watching myself from somewhere else. The house came into view, a place that had once been my sanctuary. Now it was nothing more than a battlefield. Pulled into the driveway and killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. For a few seconds I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, gathering the strength to go inside. When I finally did, I opened the door to find the house dark, except for a faint light coming from the living room. The air felt heavy, like the walls knew what had happened and were still mourning it. My boots thudded against the floor as I moved toward the glow, bracing myself for whatever I might find. And there she was. Elizabeth was sitting on the couch, her legs curled underneath her, dressed in that same cashmere robe. A glass of wine sat on the coffee table in front of her, half empty, and her phone lay beside it. She didn't look up when I walked in. She just stared at the television, where some sitcom played on mute, the characters laughing in silent oblivion. You're back, she said, her voice as emotionless as her expression. Stood there, my fists clenched at my sides. Did you think I wouldn't come back? Elizabeth turned to look at me then, her eyes cold and calculating, as if she were already 3 steps ahead. In a game I didn't even know we were playing. I thought you might run away. It's what you do, isn't it? You avoid things until they disappear. Her words hit me like a slap. Avoid things? Avoid things? You think I'm avoiding something here, Elizabeth? You're the one who... She held up a hand to cut me off, like I was nothing more than a nuisance, interrupting her evening. I'm not in the mood for another screaming match, Lucas. I'm exhausted. The arrogance in her voice made my blood boil. You're exhausted? You're the one who blew up our marriage today. You don't get to act like the victim here. She tilted her head, an infuriating smirk tugging at her lips. I'm not acting like anything. I'm just done with the theatrics. You shot Andrew. You could have killed him. And now you're standing there pretending like you're the wronged party. The room fell silent, stared at her, stunned. Pretending? You cheated on me, Elizabeth. You brought him into our house, into our bed, she shrugged, sipping her wine with a casualness that sent a fresh wave of rage through me. Maybe I wouldn't have if you'd been the man you were supposed to be. It was like she'd rehearsed this in her head. Every line, every jab aimed perfectly to gut me. Don't you dare put this on me, I growled, my voice low and trembling. Elizabeth leaned back on the couch, her gaze sharp. Oh, come on, Lucas. You think this just happened out of nowhere? You've been checked out for years. You stopped caring. You stopped trying. I found someone who actually pays attention to me, who sees me for who I am. That's not my fault. Took a step toward her, my hands shaking. You're unbelievable. You have the audacity to sit there and justify this. Before I could finish, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the room like a gunshot. Both of us froze. The tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Turned toward the door, my heart pounding. Who the hell would be at my house right now? Elizabeth didn't move, her wine glass still poised in her hand. You should get that, she said lazily, her voice dripping with mock amusement. Ignored her and walked to the door, my pulse thrumming in my ears. opened it slowly, half expecting to see a cop standing there, ready to haul me off for shooting Andrew. Instead, it was him. Andrew. He stood there on the porch, leaning heavily on a crutch, his face pale and drawn, had a bandage wrapped around his thigh where I'd shot him, and a look of forced bravado on his face. "What the hell are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice like gravel. Andrew's lips curled into a smug grin, though he winced as he shifted on his crutch. "Thought we should talk, Lucas." Man to man. Stared at him, my hands clenching at my sides. "You've got 5 seconds to get off my porch." Before I finished what I started, he didn't flinch. Instead, he looked past me into the house, where Elizabeth was still lounging on the couch, like a queen overseeing her kingdom. "I'm not leaving, Lucas. We've got unfinished business." My fists clenched so hard, thought I'd break my own bones. Wanted to drag him off my porch and throw him into the street, but something held me back. Some twisted curiosity, some dark desire to see where this was going. "Going," Elizabeth called from the living room, her voice carrying like a knife through the air. "Let him in, Lucas. We all need to talk." Turned to glare at her. "Are you insane?" She smiled. That same smug, infuriating smile. "What's the matter?" Afraid of a little conversation, Andrew stepped forward, his crutch thunking against the wood of the porch. "Come on, Lucas. Don't be a coward." Turned back to him, my vision narrowing. The audacity of it. Him standing there in my house, uninvited and unrepentant, made me want to lose control all over again. But I didn't. Not yet. "Fine," I said coldly. Stepping aside, "Let's talk." Andrew hobbled inside, leaning heavily on his crutch, as though he were some war hero limping home. Couldn't stand the sight of him. My hand itched, the memory of pulling the trigger fresh in my mind, but I shoved the feeling down. Wasn't going to let this bastard provoke me again? At least not yet. Elizabeth stayed sprawled on the couch, like she owned the place, her wine glass in hand, watching the two of us with a mixture of amusement and curiosity. Couldn't decide if she was cruel or delusional. Maybe both. Andrew stopped in the middle of the living room, his face tight with pain as he adjusted his weight. "We need to clear the air, Lucas," he said, trying to sound confident, though his voice wavered. "Clear the air?" I repeated slowly, staring at him like he was insane. "You came into my house, slept with my wife, and now you want to have a civil conversation?" Andrew tilted his head. For a second thought, I saw fear flash in his eyes. "I'm not saying I'm proud of what happened, Che." Elizabeth cut him off with a laugh, a cold, sharp laugh that made the hair on my neck stand up. "Oh, come on, Andrew. Don't pretend you're sorry now. You weren't sorry an hour ago when you were in my bed." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Turned to her, my voice low and sharp. "Shut up, Elizabeth." But she didn't. She leaned back against the cushions, swirling the wine in her glass, like this was all a show for her amusement. "What?" "Don't like the truth, Lucas. Don't like hearing that someone else made me feel more alive than you ever did?" "Jesus Christ, Elizabeth!" I exploded, unable to hold back the anger boiling inside me. Turned to Andrew, pointing a finger at him. "And you actually think you can stand here in my house and play the good guy? You're lucky I didn't shoot you somewhere worse." Andrew shifted on his crutch, looking at Elizabeth with something close to panic. Could see the cracks in his bravado now. He hadn't expected this. Maybe he thought Elizabeth would defend him more, that she'd soften the situation somehow. But Elizabeth didn't care. She was enjoying this, feeding off it like some twisted parasite. "Look, Lucas," Andrew said, holding up his free hand. "I didn't come here to fight. I came here because Elizabeth said we should all talk like adults," barked out a bitter laugh. "Like adults? Do you hear yourself right now?" Andrew's gaze flickered back to Elizabeth, as though silently pleading with her for backup. She just sipped her wine and watched him squirm. "Don't look at me," she said casually. "You wanted to talk? Go ahead and talk." Andrew's face reddened. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. But he tried again, his voice steadier this time. "I get it, Lucas. You're angry. I would be too. But this thing between me and Elizabeth, there is no thing," I snarled, stepping closer, my fists clenched. "You don't get to come into my life and pretend this is some mutual understanding. You're nothing but a lying, spineless Elizabeth's voice cut through the room like a whip. "Enough, Lucas!" Froze, turning to look at her. She was still calm, still unshaken, as if the chaos around her was entertainment. She tilted her head slightly, that smug smile tugging at her lips. "Let's be honest here. This marriage was over long before Andrew came into the picture. You just didn't want to see it. Is that what you tell yourself?" I said, my voice trembling. "That it's my fault you decided to lie and cheat your way through this marriage?" She shrugged, as though it was the simplest thing in the world. "Maybe it is your fault. You stopped being enough for me. I got tired of being the only one trying. And Andrew." She gestured lazily toward him. He made me feel alive again. He gave me something you never could. Andrew stood there like an idiot, his mouth opening and closing, as he tried to figure out how to react. Couldn't look at him anymore. My focus was on Elizabeth, on the woman I'd given everything to, the woman who was now tearing me apart piece by piece. You know what, Elizabeth, I said, my voice calm but venomous. You're a real piece of work. I spent years loving you, supporting you, and this is how you repay me. By dragging some loser into our bed and then blaming me for it. Her smile vanished. For the first time, something in her expression shifted, something dark. She put down her wine glass and stood up, crossing the room to stand inches from me. You don't get it, do you, Lucas? She hissed. I don't owe you anything. Not love, not loyalty, nothing. If I want to be with Andrew, I will, and you can't do a damn thing about it. My jaw tightened. Is that what you really think? She leaned closer, her voice dripping with contempt. That's what I know. A silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Andrew looked like he wanted to disappear, but he couldn't leave without my permission. Not with that crutch and his injured leg. Stared at Elizabeth, my anger and disbelief boiling over, until it felt like it would consume me entirely. Finally spoke, my voice deadly calm. Get out! Elizabeth blinked. Excuse me? You heard me, I said, my tone steady. Both of you, get out of my house. Now, Elizabeth scoffed. Oh, please. This house is as much mine as it is yours. Not anymore, I said coldly. You forfeited your rights. The second you brought him here, Andrew cleared his throat awkwardly. Maybe we should just shut up, I snapped at him. I'm not talking to you. Elizabeth's smirk returned. What are you going to do, Lucas? Call the cops? Tell them you shot Andrew in a fit of rage? Who do you think they'll believe? That stopped me cold. For the first time since this nightmare began, realized she had me cornered. If I pushed too hard, if I forced her out, she could destroy everything. She could spin the story however she wanted. And I'd be the villain. Elizabeth must have seen it in my face, because her smile widened. That's what I thought, she said softly. Stood there staring at her, my mind racing. For a brief moment, wondered if I could ever beat her at this game. If there was even a way to win. You're a monster, I muttered. Elizabeth shrugged. Maybe, but at least I'm honest about who I am. Can you say the same, Lucas? Her words hung in the air, and I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence that followed Elizabeth's last words felt like it could suffocate me. She stood there with her arms crossed, head tilted slightly, wearing that smug grin like a crown. Andrew lingered behind her like a beaten dog, swaying on his crutch, avoiding eye contact, as though he might disappear if he stood still long enough. Clenched my fists so tightly, my nails dug into my palms, my entire body shaking with the urge to lash out. But I knew better. Elizabeth wanted me to snap, wanted me to make some colossal mistake she could use against me. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction, my voice cold and steady. Despite the rage boiling inside me, Elizabeth raised an eyebrow, her smirk unwavering. No, Lucas, I'm just done letting you control me. You think I'm the villain here? Because I found happiness outside of this sad excuse for a marriage. Please, I did what I had to do. Happiness? I spat. You call sneaking around and shoving some two-bit loser into our life happiness? Andrew's head snapped up at that, and for the first time, he found his voice. Watch it, man, he said, trying to sound tough, though it was hard to take him seriously. With him leaning on that crutch like a wounded deer, turned my attention to him, my glare pinning him in place. Oh, now you've got something to say? You couldn't even limp off my porch earlier without trembling, but now you want to stand here and act tough in my house? Took a step closer, and he instinctively took a step back. Lucas, stop, Elizabeth snapped, stepping between us. You're being pathetic. Look at you, so desperate to blame everyone but yourself. Let out a bitter laugh. Blame myself for what? For trusting you? For working my ass off to give us a good life, while you paraded around behind my back like some cheap Her eyes narrowed, the smile finally faltering. Good, I'd finally gotten under her skin. You're so predictable, Lucas, she hissed. Always the victim, always whining about how hard you work and how good you are. Meanwhile, you haven't been a real husband to me in years. I was lonely, Lucas. I was miserable, and you didn't even notice. Felt like I'd been slapped. The gall of her, the audacity, stepped closer, the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. You don't get to rewrite history just because you feel guilty, Elizabeth. I was there. I was always there. You're just too selfish to admit that you're the problem. She shook her head with mock disappointment, letting out a fake sigh. Andrew decided to chime in again, his voice annoyingly calm. Maybe you should just let it go, man. Things happen. That was it. My head snapped toward him, and before I knew it, I was standing right in front of him. He tried to back away, but with his crutch and injured leg, he couldn't move fast enough. Grabbed his shirt collar, shoving him hard against the wall. The thud echoed through the house, and his crutch clattered to the floor as he yelped in pain. "You don't get to stand in my house and talk like that," growled, my face inches from his. "You happened. You walked into my life like a parasite and ruined everything," grabbing at my arm, but I barely registered her. Andrew's eyes went wide with fear. He looked so pathetic, so weak, that I almost felt pity for him. Almost. Instead, I tightened my grip, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You think you're a man because you crawled into my bed while I wasn't looking? You're nothing. Less than nothing?" Okay, Andrew stammered, wincing as I shoved him once more. "I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, all right?" Let go of him abruptly, stepping back, watching as he slumped to the ground, gasping for breath. Elizabeth rushed to his side, glaring up at me with venom in her eyes. "You've lost your mind, Lucas," she shouted. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "What's wrong with me?" I shouted back, my voice cracking. "What's wrong is that I trusted you. I loved you. And you threw it all away like it was garbage." Elizabeth straightened up, her expression hard. "Oh, grow up, Lucas. People move on. That's life. You were just too weak to see it coming." Her words hit me harder than any punch could. I felt something inside me snap, something I didn't know if I could ever put back together. Turned and walked toward the door, my heart pounding, my breathing heavy. "Where are you going?" Elizabeth demanded, her voice sharp. "Out," I said flatly. "Couldn't stay here. If I did, I didn't trust myself to keep my composure any longer." "Running away again?" she sneered. Typical Lucas. Didn't answer. Opened the door and walked out into the night, slamming it shut behind me. The cool air hit me like a shock, and I gulped it in, trying to steady myself. My hands were still shaking. Could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, like a war drum. Stood on the porch for a long moment, staring out into the darkness. The street was empty, silent, as if the whole world had stopped to watch my life fall apart. Thought about going back in there, about finishing what I'd started with Andrew. Thought about dragging Elizabeth out of the house and telling her she could never come back. But what would it change? Nothing. It wouldn't erase the betrayal, and it wouldn't bring back the life I'd lost. For the first time in my life, I felt completely alone. Sat down on the steps, burying my face in my hands. My mind was spinning, replaying everything Elizabeth had said. Every lie, every excuse, every cruel word, and then out of nowhere, realized something. This wasn't just about Elizabeth cheating. It wasn't even about Andrew. This was about me finally seeing the truth. Elizabeth had always been like this. Selfish, manipulative, cruel. I'd just been too blind, too hopeful to see it. The marriage had been dead long before I pulled the trigger, and I was the fool who didn't know it. Sat on the porch steps for what felt like hours, the cold night air biting at my skin as my thoughts spun in every direction. The silence around me was deafening. My house, my life, reduced to a battlefield I could no longer face. Thought about leaving, disappearing for a while, just to get my head straight. But the idea felt hollow. What would I even do? Where would I go? As I sat there staring at nothing, heard a noise behind me, the faint creak of the door. Glanced back and saw Elizabeth standing there, silhouetted in the soft yellow glow of the hallway light. She was holding her phone, an unreadable expression on her face. "What now, Elizabeth?" I muttered. My voice was hoarse, drained of all the fire that had been burning inside me. Just an hour ago, she hesitated, which surprised me. For once, she didn't look smug or cruel. Instead, she looked unsure, maybe even nervous. "I need to tell you something," she said quietly. Turned my head fully toward her, my brow furrowing. "You've said enough for one lifetime. Don't you think?" She ignored the jab and stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "It's not what you think, Lucas. It never was." Let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, this will be good. Go ahead, let's hear it." Her eyes narrowed, but she pressed on, her tone steadier now. "Andrew wasn't my first." The words hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. Blinked, my mouth opening slightly, as I processed what she just said. "Excuse me? I've been seeing someone else," she said bluntly, like she was stating the weather. Andrew was just convenient, easy to manipulate. Stared at her, completely stunned. "What the hell are you talking about?" Elizabeth sighed, her expression hardening again. "I didn't think you'd ever figure it out. You weren't supposed to. Andrew was a distraction, Lucas." He wasn't serious. "But this other guy," she trailed off, and for the first time, I saw something almost resembling guilt. flicker across her face. My voice was low, steady, like I was trying to keep a lid on a volcano. She looked at me with something close to pity. You don't know him, and it doesn't matter now. Doesn't matter? I repeated incredulously. You've been screwing around with multiple guys behind my back, and it doesn't matter. Elizabeth shrugged. It doesn't matter because we're over, Lucas. You know that you're just clinging to something that's already dead. I stood up slowly, the anger bubbling back up inside me, rising like a tide. I couldn't stop. I stepped toward her, and for a brief moment, she looked like she might back away, but she didn't. She stood her ground. You really don't feel a single ounce of remorse, do you? I asked, my voice shaking. Not even a shred of guilt for what you've done. Her expression turned cold again, and she tilted her head slightly. No, Lucas, I don't. And you know why? Because I'm finally free. Stared at her for a long moment. 1,000 things racing through my mind. Thought about the years I'd wasted, the sacrifices I'd made, the lies I'd been fed. Thought about the man I used to be. The man who believed in love, in marriage, in trust. That man was gone now, buried under the rubble of what Elizabeth had done. And suddenly I felt something shift inside me. Stepped back, nodding slowly. Okay. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. Okay? Yeah, I said, my voice calm and cold. You're free, Elizabeth. Congratulations. Turned and walked back into the house, leaving her standing on the porch. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Inside, I grabbed my keys and wallet, my mind eerily clear. For the first time in weeks, I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. Not tonight. As I stepped outside again, Andrew was struggling down the driveway, his crutch clunking against the pavement. Elizabeth still stood frozen near the porch, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. I barely glanced at either of them as I walked to my car. Lucas, Elizabeth called after me. Where are you going? Stopped, my hand on the car door, and turned to look at her. For once, I was the one smiling. Somewhere you can't follow me. Got in the car, the engine roaring to life as I pulled out of the driveway. In the rearview mirror, I caught one last glimpse of Elizabeth and Andrew. Elizabeth still standing there in the cold, and Andrew awkwardly fumbling with his crutch, trying to keep up. They were small now, insignificant dots against the backdrop of my former life. Drove aimlessly for a while, the streetlights blurring together. As I let the night swallow me whole, I didn't feel free. Not yet, but I felt something close to it, like the first deep breath after being underwater for too long. Eventually pulled into an old diner on the edge of town, the kind that never closes and smells like coffee and grease. Slid into a booth, the vinyl seat cold against my back, and ordered a cup of coffee. As I sat there, staring into the black liquid, I realized something that almost made me laugh. Elizabeth thought she'd won. She thought she'd broken me. But the truth was, she'd set me free. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need answers. I didn't need her. What I needed was this moment, this chance to rebuild, to take back the pieces of myself she tried so hard to destroy. Leaned back in the booth, letting out a long breath. Fresh start, I muttered to myself, the words feeling strange but right for the first time in a long time. I believed them.